A mentor is someone who talks to you, and a sponsor is someone who talks about you. A mentor gives you advice. They sit across from you. They tell you what they do. They help you think. A sponsor spends their own capital, uses their own name and their own standing in rooms that you're not in order to put your name forward.
Welcome to You Might Try This, a podcast about learning how to lead without losing yourself along the way. Hosted by executive coaches Stacy Philpott and Cade Cowan. This show draws on 25 years of experience working with high-level leaders and brings those lessons down to earth. If you're navigating leadership for the first time, managing people, questioning old rules, and trying to build a career that actually feels good, you're in the right place. This is You Might Try This. Honest leadership advice for ambitious people who still want to sleep at night.
Welcome back to You Might Try This, the show for people stepping into leadership and working it out in real time. I'm Cade, Stacy's with me, and I want to start today with a scene that's happened to every single person listening, whether or not they know it. Somewhere in your organization at some point, there's a room, could be a formal calibration meeting, could be two execs grabbing coffee, and your name comes up for a promotion, for a stretch project, for some short list that you want to be on, and you are not present in that room. You will never be in that room. The single most consequential conversation about your career happens when you're nowhere near it. And a lot of how it goes down it depends on whether somebody in there knows who you are and is willing to spend a little of their own social capital to say so.
Yeah, and that picks up where we left off last week, because we spent all of episode 23 on how do you make your work visible, and specifically the importance of saying what you do in a single sentence that someone else can repeat or carry with them to other settings. So then the natural next question may becomes, well, where do they repeat it? Where do they carry it to, and to whom? Because a clean sentence about your work only matters if there's a person who's willing to say it in a room that counts. So today is really the other half of what we discussed last week, which is last week was the sentence, and this week is who repeats it.
That's right. We all come up through organizations hearing the mentor story. Find a wise person and learn from them. Good things follow. And mentoring is real and mentoring is good. But it turns out there's a second relationship that does far more of the actual moving. And this relationship is much less frequently mentioned than the mentor is. And the mentor oftentimes get blurred together, and you don't actually ever see the distinction.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that difference is what we're talking about today. So let's not blur it. Cade, how would you describe that difference?
So here's the cleanest way that I've ever heard it described. A mentor is someone who talks to you. And a sponsor is someone who talks about you. A mentor gives you advice. They sit across from you. They tell you what they do. They help you think. A sponsor spends their own capital, uses their own name and their own standing in rooms that you're not in order to put your name forward. Your mentor is generous with their wisdom. A sponsor is going to be generous with their power. And you actually need both. But they're not the same relationship. And the mistake that most people make is collecting mentors and assuming that that's the same thing as having a sponsor if they give it any consideration at all. But it's not the same. Advice and advocacy, very different things.
They are different. And my guess is a lot of people just heard that and felt something click a little uncomfortably, because they probably can name maybe 3 people who give them great advice, but they're not sure that they can name one who'd actually go to bat for them when it counted. And that gap right there is what we're going to spend this episode on.
So the researcher who's done the most to make this distinction clear is Erminia Ibarra. We've talked about her before. She studies career and leadership. And the line of hers that stuck with me is almost exactly what I said. A mentor has knowledge and shares it with you. A sponsor has power and uses it for you. And she points out that a mentor can be almost anybody, a peer, even someone junior to you. Heck, I need an AI mentor right now, and that person's probably going to be junior to me. They can be anywhere in the organization. But a sponsor has to be somebody with real pull, because the whole point is that they can reach into a decision and move influence the decision. If they can't affect the outcome, they're a wonderful supporter. We're happy to have supporters, but they're not a sponsor.
And that distinction can be helpful and may explain why some people get a lot of great advice, but don't feel they are moving ahead as fast as they would like. It's not that they're getting bad advice. It's that advice isn't enough to propel you. You can have the wisest mentors in the building and still be standing exactly where you were because none of them were ever positioned to spend anything on you and you didn't know how to ask them to do so.
And there's a cost to not knowing how to ask for that. And Ibarra has a phrase for the pattern. She says a lot of people, and women especially, they end up over-mentored and under-sponsored. So they're loaded up with advice, but they're starving for advocacy. And I want to bring in the numbers on the advocacy side because they're striking. There's an economist named Sylvia Ann Hewlett, and she studied sponsorship very rigorously. And what she found is that having a sponsor measurably changes your odds. People with a sponsor are meaningfully more likely to get the next promotion. They're more likely to get a stretch assignment, more likely to see pay increases, like real differences. And that's just from having someone with pull in your corner.
And can you talk about the other half of her finding? Because I think it's intriguing and people would find that really helpful.
Yeah, the other half is that it's not only good for the protege, but it's also good for the sponsor. So Hewlett found that the senior people who actively sponsor rising talent are themselves more likely to get promoted than the ones who don't. So this isn't charity simply flowing downhill. Sponsoring someone good is one of the ways that you build your own standing. You get seen as a person who spots talent, who develops talent. And that's exactly what senior people are supposed to be doing.
Yeah. So let's talk about what a sponsor is doing specifically, because they're in that room that you described, that room at the top, the one maybe you're not in, right? And your name comes up or they bring it up. And there's a moment where they can either stay quiet or they can say something like, I've watched Cade's work, put him on it, and I will stake myself on this. That sentence, I'll stake myself on this, is what matters. I once worked with a man named Jim Shanley, and when I would talk about people who would ask me the same question every single time, he would say, would you stake your professional reputation on their ability? That is a very different question than, is she nice? Does she work hard? Can she do this? It's someone with standing, putting a piece of that standing at risk on your behalf. That's what a sponsor does in the room where it counts. And that's what matters.
Yep. And we keep talking about that room that you're not in, and it's where every real decision about you happens. And you can spend your whole career trying to be so good that the room can't ignore you. And yet you can still miss out because the room was never evaluating the work directly. It was listening to whoever was speaking for the work. So the question stops being whether you're good enough for that room, and it becomes whether anybody sitting in that room is actually saying your name out loud.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about this concept of over-mentored and under-sponsored. There's a study that takes Ibarra's phrase and puts some real hard numbers behind it. This comes from 2010 from the research organization Catalyst. And Catalyst followed a very large group of high-potential people, thousands of MBAs coming out of the same programs, and tracked what happened to their careers. They looked specifically at mentoring and found that mentoring does have a very measurable impact on someone's career. People with mentors did better than people without mentors. Okay. But when they split the pool by gender, something got interesting and even a little uncomfortable. High potential women in this study were actually mentored more than the men. Women had more mentors, not fewer, but they were promoted less frequently and paid less than their male counterparts. So what Catalyst observed is that mentoring by itself was not closing the gap, and in some ways it was sort of papering over it.
Making it look nice, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a genuinely strange result on its face. More mentoring, less advancement. Based on our conversation so far, I think I can imagine what the missing piece was.
Yes, it was. That missing piece was sponsorship. Right? When Catalyst looked closer, the men were more often getting mentored by senior people who then actively advocated for them. They put their names forward. They opened specific doors, whereas the women were more often getting mentored privately. They were given advice and prepped, but their mentors were not spending their real capital to move them ahead. They were being developed, but not necessarily deployed, which is why Catalyst, I think, called the report mentoring is necessary but insufficient. It's really the whole finding. Mentoring helps, but it doesn't move you on its own.
And I think that lands on a particular fear that a lot of people carry, which is that the answer here is going to be some political game that they don't want to play, that to get sponsored, you've got to become a bit of a schmoozer. And that's not what the research is actually pointing at all.
No, and it's a part that I think is important because it's a bit more hopeful. Sponsorship isn't won by charm. It's won by being a good bet that somebody can actually see. Sponsors don't stake themselves on the person who flattered them the most. They stake themselves on the person whose work they genuinely watched because their own name is going on the line. There's some risk for them. They can't afford to back someone who won't deliver. So the ground floor of being sponsorable, if you will, is exactly the thing we talked about last week. It's doing work that's visible and legible enough that someone with power has actually seen it and could describe it.
Yes. And then there's the other direction, which I don't want to skip because it's half the episode. Most people listening are somewhere in the middle. They've got people below them, people above them, which means you're not only looking for a sponsor, you are right now in a position to be a sponsor. So you're already in some of the rooms that other people aren't. And the question of whose name you carry into those rooms is one of the most real forms of leadership there is. It's Hewlett's point from the other side, that the part that turns out to be good for you too.
And also, honestly, where a lot of people find they've been quietly, if I can use this word, hoarding.
Yes.
Because it's easy to give advice. Advice is cheap. It costs you nothing to tell a junior person what you do. Spending your actual standing or political capital on them is a different thing. And it's worth asking yourself, when is the last time I did that? When did I last put my own name at risk for somebody who wasn't in the room? For a lot of us, the honest answer is that we mentor all day and we sponsor almost never. We're generous with advice, but stingy with social capital. And we never have really noticed the difference because we didn't really see that it was the same. It was different. We used the same word.
I just love in this episode, like the reality that we're talking about, like that room that you're not in, where your name may or may not be mentioned. I mean, you and I, we're in those rooms. Like we have direct experience of this, right?
And I think, Cade, what's also important for people to know is it's different when you're early in your career versus mid-career. When you're early in career, you're trying to build competence. So advice is very meaningful. When you don't know how to do something, someone giving you advice is very valuable. But as you build up more of your own expertise, advice isn't the only thing you need. You do need sponsorship. So this is one of those things that evolves over time and you might not notice it at first.
Particularly when you develop a specialization and you might be the most competent person in an organization on some particular domain, like the advice isn't going to be as helpful. So that sponsorship and being able to make sure that the sponsor can describe your work using the sentence that we talked about last week becomes just super important for your advancement.
It does.
So 3 experiments, pick one and pick the one that scares you a little, as we always say, because this is a topic where the uncomfortable one is usually the one with the payoff.
It's true. It's very on brand thing for us to say, but it's true here more than usual.
So the first one is the concrete ask. So most people, when they finally work up the nerve to reach out to someone senior, they ask for the wrong thing. They say, will you be my mentor? Or can I pick your brain? Which is asking for advice. And it puts the whole burden back on the senior person to like figure out what to do with you. You know, a concrete ask is different. It's a specific request that the person actually has the power to grant, and they can do it in one move. You know, you might say like, I'd love to present the Q3 findings in the staff review. Would you put my name forward for that? Or, you know, there's a task force forming on implementing this new software. You're close to that work. Would you recommend me for it? Both of those examples, very concrete, and it's something that the senior person can say yes to in a single sentence, you know, something that spends a little bit of their pull, you know, rather than the whole afternoon.
And Kate, first of all, you're really good at this. I've seen you do it, and I've kind of learned how to do this from you. And the beauty of the concrete ask is that it's easier for the other person to say yes to that than something vague. Be my mentor is a big open-ended commitment, and people might not know exactly what that means. Put my name on this list or let me take this role in a meeting takes them 10 seconds to agree to or not. And often it feels good for them to do. You're not asking for more or a long-term commitment necessarily. You're just asking for something concrete, and it's something they can actually give.
Yes. Stacey, take the second one.
All right. The second one is what we call the sponsor audit, and it's easy to do on your own. So start by making a list of the people who are invested in you at work, the people who help you, and then sort every name into one of two columns. Column one, people who talk to you. They give you advice, they coach you, maybe they make you better. Column two, people who talk about you, who would actually say your name in a room you're not in and put a little of themselves behind it. Most people doing this honestly find column one is quite crowded and column two is nearly empty. That's not unusual. It's not a failure. It's just a map. And once you see it, you can do something about it because now you know who you don't need maybe another mentor or, what you maybe don't need advice on. You may need more sponsors. And part of the trick is how do you turn one of those column one relationships, someone who gives you advice, into a column two relationship where they can sponsor you? Or do you find a new sponsor?
This particular experiment can be a bit clarifying in a slightly jarring way because a name that you thought was doing a lot for you turns out to be sitting in the advice column, and you realize you've been counting on advocacy from someone who was really only giving you advice.
Yes. So let me give you the third one, which is say the name. This week in a room where some junior person isn't present, say their name attached to something specific and good. Say that to someone who has the power to make a difference for them. So we're not talking about a performance review or not when you're asked, unprompted in the hallway, in a meeting. You should know the reason the launch didn't fall apart is Priya caught the dependency no one else saw. That's it. You become a sponsor in the space of one sentence. And here's what I've watched happen. The leaders who make a habit of saying other people's names in rooms become the people everyone wants to work for. And then their own names start traveling in rooms they're not in because that's how it tends to come back around.
Yep. So you got the concrete ask, the sponsor audit, and say my name. Say the name. Excuse me. You might try this.
And next week, we stay in these conversations about relationships, but we're going to turn it sideways because we've spent a couple of episodes looking up and down the ladder at who sponsors you and who you sponsor. Next time, it's the hardest direction of all, the people who are right next to you, your peers.
Tricky peers.
Oh my God. So it's always the hardest one, right? It's because these are the ones you have to lead without any authority over them, who are sometimes quietly up for the exact same thing you are. And it's tricky, but that's next week.
That'll be a fun one. I'll see you then, Stacey.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to You Might Try This, brought to you by EDC and Edgewise Media. To learn more about the podcast, visit youmightTryThis.com or connect with us on social media.